Good morning, Nicole, and welcome to Crypto Clothesline.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. This is very exciting.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you do, please?
Sure thing. So what I do is predominantly teach small business owners how to generate their own publicity in order to grow their credibility, their profile, and profitability. And it's quite easily done. And then I also do a bit of PR and helping bigger businesses get into the media that don't have the time to do it themselves.
And so when you talk about free publicity and what have you, are you talking about helping people get into the media?
Yeah, so I think traditional media, because nowadays a lot of people, when you say media, they just assume social media. That's how we're being conditioned. But I dabble in the space of TV, radio and print, and helping people get interviewed on whether it's a big TV show or smaller local media. It all adds to, I guess, growing your profile, getting out there and getting in front of the people who need to hear your message the most.
And so in terms of, say, somebody who is in their early 20s, like we talked about the fact that we had an interview with CryptoGat, this man called Ivan, and he has a following of over 70,000 people on social media. So, I mean, even if he got into traditional print media, that's still going to have a full-blown effect, isn't it, in the social media realm?
Yeah, definitely. And I think with the younger generation too, because a lot of their world is social media, and the more likes you have, the better that is for your ego and your profile. Like, you know, that's something that really matters for that generation. That it's a great thing for them to go out and get those likes and to get those followers, but potentially without realizing the full ramifications of what that's going to have when something goes wrong, like it did for Ivan, because that's not something that is really talked about. It's just go out there, get your followers, become an influencer, and then you're wonderful. But nobody's there to talk about the downfall and how that can be really tragic and impact one's life.
Could you talk a little bit about the effect of a negative media attention or negative media impact on the personal life then of a public figure or an influencer?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, if you look at, I guess, anybody that's in the media. So if we have a look, for example, at Barnaby Joyce, so an Australian, he was the Deputy Prime Minister and had a bit of a falling from grace of recent times, came out and said he'd had an affair, that one of his staff is pregnant, has now had his baby. He's on stress leave, or he's on leave from his position, and was just interviewed on Channel 7 here in Australia. And the fallout of that has had quite an impact as well. People are saying that it was a load of rubbish and that he's a politician and his values are all twisted up and he's a family man. I think he's got 3 or 4 kids with his first wife, and he shouldn't be in a position of power in the country if he can't keep it in his pants, basically. So the impact on him in terms of, he was the Deputy Prime Minister. People now mistrust him. You know, there's a lot of value judgment on him for what he's done, and he's fallen from grace. And this has impacted his career. And so this can happen all of the time. And you've got to have a really thick skin to be a public figure. You have to know, you've got to have some nous about, what am I going to say? How is it going to affect me? What are the implications if something does go wrong? And do I have crisis management in place, particularly if you've got 70,000 followers? I mean, that's intense. And if you think, if there's one comment that somebody doesn't like, or, you know, with Ivan having this fall from grace, and those 70,000 people all go and tell, 10 people about it, then all of a sudden it's out to 700,000 people. So the flow-on effect can be huge, and it can be really damaging and difficult to get back from. So you've really got to be thinking clearly about, what am I saying, what am I doing, and what's my exit strategy as well.
It's a really interesting concept that a person so young at the age of 23, he talked about the fact that the following grew exponentially also because of the huge onslaught of early adopters into cryptocurrency late last year, the November-December, rush into the space. A lot of people who were uninformed and uneducated, and his whole ethos has been to make sure that everybody does their due diligence, knows and researches for themselves and takes personal responsibility. But it's an interesting question at what point a public figure becomes responsible for the decisions of people that really trust them.
Yes, and you see this as well with a lot of the sporting, like as you're saying that, it comes to my mind about sporting role models. And when we have people that, are good at what they do and they want to go out there and continue to do what they love in terms of, playing sport, it might be representing their country or their state, and they're getting paid a lot of money and they're in the public eye, and then they go and do something stupid or break the law. They might get caught up in drugs or, assaulting somebody. And then what does that do for the people that are watching, for the kids that are holding these people on a pedestal and looking up to what they do? It just puts a whole lot of confusion and, again, mistrust out there and can just be so damaging. And if you look at the cricketers as well recently in Australia that were caught up in that, the cheating debacle and the impact that's had on the country in terms of cricket and sporting. And, it's such a big thing to take on. And it does concern me that Ivan stepped into this space and so very quickly has had this massive audience jump on board and follow him. And because I guess, the world of cryptocurrency is relatively new and so many people, as you said, did just jump on the bandwagon towards the end of last year. There's a lot of people out there that just don't understand what's happening. You get a lot of keyboard warriors who feel really brave, think they're a bit of a hero because they're behind their computer on their keyboard and will quickly pull people down because particularly in Australia, we have a tall poppy syndrome. So we like to bring people down. And if you're not ready for that, it's a real concern. And I guess this is one of the areas of cryptocurrency that people have really got to be aware of is when you go out into the public space in this field that is so technology based, you're opening yourself up for these types of attacks and possible hacks as well.
So just before we finish, I know when I came along to one of your high profit media events, you talked at length about your own experience being slammed down by a one comment that you made on social media. I didn't want you to necessarily recount that, but can you just talk about the effect on you personally, how that felt for you?
That was probably, I was talking about being interviewed by the Sunday Times, a newspaper here in Perth, I think, and I'd spoke about, I was quoted out of context, and they were talking about the journalist had interviewed me around health and safety for the mining industry. And I'd mentioned that my husband would take his own first aid kit out to work that had Band-Aids and Panadol. And then it came out on the front page of the Sunday Times saying FIFO workers take homemade first aid kits to work. And basically he based the story around half of my quote and didn't leave in there the Panadols and Band-Aid, and the impact was huge on my business. So there was the next week, the Sunday Times headline was Department of Mines and Petroleum launches investigation into homemade first aid kit. And I had a company come to me and say, how could you do this? You've damaged the industry. We will never work with you. And
wow.
Yeah, and it was quite huge. Thankfully, the companies that were working with me didn't freak out because they also knew of the reputation of the Sunday Times. But it seems like that when you think you're being honest, like Ivan probably was, and sharing what you know and you're trying to help people or improve an industry, and somebody can take something out of context, as the media have been known to do, and it can completely change your business and impact it in such a way. Luckily, I recovered from that and was just the one company that said they wouldn't work with me. But you've just really got to be careful about what you say and how you represent yourself. You've got to really think about it.
And even if you do present the truth and the whole truth, you really don't have any guarantee that it's going to be presented in a completely holistic way, that people are not going to put their own slant on it.
Yeah, that's right. And one person's truth can be another person's untruth. And so there'll always be people that will come out and try and, slam you down. Not all the time, but there's always that debate. And if it's a bit controversial, particularly in the world of cryptocurrency, where a lot of people are saying it's rubbish, it's not going to amount to anything, people that aren't educated about it, it's very easy for them to jump onto something like this and say, see, I told you so, it's a load of rubbish and it's never going to amount to anything. So it's a space where you need to just be cautious and just be aware of what you're saying and what you're putting out there.
Well, thank you so much for your input today. It's been fabulous to hear from your professional perspective, but also from your personal perspective, having experienced something similar, totally different sort of situation, but having been at the receiving end of that kind of media as well.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.